The space station floated in the darkness between stars. Meridian 7 was not beautiful, but it was neutral ground. For 900 years, humans and the Crithian Empire had not spoken to each other. Now, finally, they would meet again. General. Hana Lee stood at the observation window and watched the Crithian ships approach. She was 54 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her uniform was dark blue with silver stars on the shoulders. She had spent 30 years in the military, but this was her most important mission. Behind her, Ambassador Doyen Park was reviewing documents on his tablet. He was nervous. She could tell by the way he kept clearing his throat. "They're early," Doyen said. "That's either a good sign or a bad one." "It's neither," Hana replied. "They're just punctual." The treaty had ended the bloodiest war anyone could remember. Humans and Crithians had fought for 12 years. Entire planets had burned. Billions had died. When it finally ended, both sides were exhausted and terrified. They agreed to stay apart. A massive zone of empty space separated their territories. No contact, no communication, nothing. But 9 centuries was a long time. New generations had been born. The old hatred had faded into history books. Someone suggested trade. Someone else suggested talks. Slowly, carefully, the two sides had agreed to this meeting. Hana had been chosen to lead the human delegation because she understood war. She had studied every battle of the old conflict. She knew what humans were capable of when pushed too far. She also knew that peace was harder than war. The Crithian ships docked with a heavy clang that echoed through the station. Hana smoothed her uniform and walked to the meeting hall. Her team followed behind her. Doyun walked beside her, still looking nervous. "Remember," she said quietly, "we're here to listen, not to fight." The doors opened. The Crithian delegation was already inside. They were tall, much taller than humans. Their skin was dark purple and covered in small scales. Their eyes were large and golden. They wore robes of deep red with black patterns. At the front stood Legate Vokros, the Empire's chief diplomat. Vokros looked at Hana with those strange golden eyes. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Hana stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Legate Vokros, thank you for coming." Vokros tilted his head, which Hana knew was their version of a bow. "General Lee, we meet at last." The negotiations took 3 days. They were difficult. Both sides had demands. Both sides had fears. The Crithians wanted access to human mining technology. Humans wanted access to Crithian medical advances. But underneath every discussion was the weight of history. On the 3rd day, they reached an agreement. It was small, just a trial trade program, but it was a start. The ceremony would make it official. The signing ceremony was held in the main hall. Representatives from other species had come to witness it. This was historic. After 900 years, the silence was breaking. Hana stood at the table with a pen in her hand. Across from her, Vokros held his own signing device. The room was full of cameras and reporters. Everyone wanted to see this moment. "To a new era," Doyen said, reading from his prepared speech. "May our children know only peace." Vokros signed first. Then Hana signed. The room erupted in applause. But as the applause faded, Vokros said something that made the room go quiet. He spoke in the Crithian language, but the translators picked it up. "It is remarkable," he said, "that such a small species has survived this long." The human delegation went still. Hana felt her jaw tighten. That was an insult. In Crithian culture, calling someone small was one of the worst things you could say. Doyen started to respond angrily, but Hana put a hand on his arm. She looked directly at Vokros. "Yes," she said calmly. "We are small, but we are also still here." Vokros's eyes widened slightly. That was surprise. "Good. Let him think about that." The ceremony ended. The delegations began to leave. Hana felt tired, but satisfied. They had accomplished something important today. In a few hours, she would board a ship back to Earth. Then the alarm started blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the station. A voice came over the speakers in multiple languages. Security breach. All personnel to safe zones immediately. Hana's training kicked in instantly. Everyone move, she shouted to her team. But it was too late. The doors to the hall burst open. Armed figures in black armor rushed in. They wore Crithian combat gear, but something was wrong. These weren't official soldiers. The markings on their armor were different. Extremists, Vokros hissed. They oppose the peace. Weapons fired. Energy bolts lit up the room. People screamed and ran. Hana grabbed Doyen and pulled him behind a table. She had a sidearm on her hip. She drew it. "Stay down," she ordered. The attackers were firing randomly, trying to kill everyone in the room. Hana saw one of them aim directly at Doyun. She didn't think. She moved. The energy bolt hit her in the chest instead. Pain. Incredible pain. Hana fell backwards. The room spun. She heard shouting, more weapons fire, then silence. Someone was kneeling beside her. Doyun. He was crying. "Get a medic," he screamed. Station security had arrived. The attackers were dead or captured. But it didn't matter now. Hana could feel her life draining away. The shot had burned through her armor and deep into her body. They carried her to the medical bay. Doctors worked frantically. Human and even some Crethian medical staff tried everything. But the damage was too severe. Hana knew she was dying. She could feel it. She grabbed Doyen's hand. He was still there, tears running down his face. "Don't let them make us monsters again," she whispered. Those were her last words. General Hana Lee, hero of humanity, died on a space station between stars. The woman who had worked so hard for peace became its final casualty, but she would not be the last to die. News of her death spread fast, first to the human delegation, then to the ships in orbit, then across the communication networks to Earth and every human colony. Within hours, everyone knew. General Hana Lee had been murdered by Crithians. The Crithian Empire immediately sent messages. They said it was extremists. They said they would punish those responsible. They offered apologies, compensation, anything. But on Earth, in the colonies, on every human station and ship, the reaction was the same. Rage. Pure, burning rage. The peace that had lasted 900 years shattered like glass, and underneath it humanity remembered what it had tried so hard to forget. They remembered how to hate. They remembered how to kill. And worst of all, they remembered the weapons they had locked away after the last war. The weapons they had sworn never to use again. In military command centers across human space, old files were being opened. Ancient codes were being entered. Sealed vaults were being unlocked. Humanity was going to war. And this time, they would show no mercy. Admiral Jiho Kang received the news while inspecting his flagship. He was in the engine room when his communication device buzzed. He looked at the screen and saw the message. For a long moment, he just stared at it. General Hana Lee was dead. The device fell from his hand and clattered on the metal floor. The engineers nearby looked at him with concern. Jiho didn't notice. His mind had gone somewhere else, somewhere far away. 20 years ago, Jiho had been a young captain. Hana had been his commanding officer. She had taught him everything about leadership, strategy, and honor. She had saved his life once during a training accident. He had considered her his mentor, his friend, his guiding star. Now she was gone. "Sir?" one of the engineers asked. "Are you okay?" Jiho picked up the device. His hands were shaking. "Get the ship ready for immediate departure," he said quietly. "We're going to war." On Earth, President Suman Choi stood in the emergency council chamber. She was surrounded by military commanders, politicians, and advisors. Everyone was shouting. Everyone wanted blood. "We need to strike immediately," one general demanded. "Show them we won't tolerate this." "We should destroy their border colonies first," another suggested. Suman raised her hand for silence. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for careful thinking. She had been elected because she promised peace and prosperity. Now everything was falling apart. "The Crithian Empire claims it was extremists," she said. "They've offered to hand over those responsible. They're lying, someone shouted. This was planned. We don't know that, Suman replied. It doesn't matter. That was Admiral Jiho. He had arrived from his ship just minutes ago. His uniform was disheveled. His eyes were red. They killed her. That's all that matters. Suman looked at him sadly. She knew he had been close to Hana. Jiho, I understand your pain, but we need to think clearly. No, Jiho said. His voice was cold. We need to act. The Krithians understand only one thing: strength. The debate raged for hours, but outside in the cities and colonies, people had already made up their minds. Protests filled the streets. Crowds gathered outside government buildings. They all chanted the same thing: remember Hana. Remember Hana. Some carried pictures of the general. Others carried signs demanding vengeance. The anger was spreading like fire, and fire was hard to control. In a secret facility beneath the mountains of Earth, Dr. Minho Song received an order he had hoped would never come. He stood before a massive vault door. The walls around it were thick enough to survive a nuclear blast. Warning signs covered every surface. Minho was an old man now, over 70. He had been the keeper of the Ashenfell archive for 30 years. The archive contained humanity's darkest secrets, weapons so terrible that they had been sealed away after the First War. Weapons that had made even the creators afraid. His assistant, a young woman named Yuna Shin, stood beside him. She was a commander in special operations assigned to protect the archive. Are they sure about this? Yuna asked. The order came from the president herself, Minho replied. We have no choice. He entered the codes. The vault door opened slowly, revealing a long corridor lined with containers. Each container held something terrible. Planet crackers that could shatter worlds, viral nanoswarms that could consume entire ecosystems, reality-bending bombs that could make physics itself unstable. We swore we'd never use these again, Yuna said quietly. We also swore we'd protect humanity, Minho replied. Sometimes those promises conflict. Back in the council chamber, the vote was finally called. Should humanity declare war on the Krithian Empire? Suman watched as the votes came in. She already knew how it would end. The anger was too strong. The pain was too fresh. Democracy sometimes meant following the will of the people, even when that will led to darkness. The final count was overwhelming. War had been declared. Suman signed the declaration with a heavy heart. She thought of Hana, who had worked so hard to prevent this exact moment. I'm sorry, she whispered to the memory of her friend. Admiral Jiho wasted no time. He gathered his fleet within days. Ships came from every human colony. Carriers, battleships, destroyers, frigates. Even civilian ships volunteered to be converted for military use. It was the largest human armada ever assembled. On the bridge of his flagship, Jiho looked at a photo of Hana. It had been taken years ago, after a successful training exercise. She was smiling. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen her smile. I'll finish what they started, he said to the photo. Yuna Shin had been assigned to his ship as a special operations commander. She found him staring at that photo late one night. Sir, she said gently. We're ready to depart. Jiho nodded. Good. Set course for the Krithian border. Sir, may I speak freely? Go ahead. Yuna hesitated. General Lee wouldn't want this. She died trying to build peace. Jiho's expression hardened. General Lee is dead. She doesn't get a vote anymore. But we do, and we're choosing to throw away everything she worked for. No, Jiho said. We're choosing to honor her death. The Krithians think we're weak. They think they can kill our best people without consequences. We're going to show them they're wrong. Yuna wanted to argue more, but she could see it was useless. The Admiral's pain had turned into something cold and hard. Like steel, like a weapon, the fleet departed Earth orbit, thousands of ships moving as one. It was a beautiful and terrible sight. The last time humanity had gathered such a force was during the First War, 9 centuries ago. As they traveled through space, more ships joined them. Every colony contributed. Every station sent what it could. Humanity was united in a way it hadn't been in centuries. United by grief. United by anger. They reached the edge of Krithian space after 2 weeks of travel. The border was marked by a line of automated warning beacons. They had been there for 900 years, reminding both sides to stay apart. Jiho gave the order. The human fleet destroyed every beacon. Send a message to the Krithian Empire, he said. Tell them we're coming. Tell them to remember what we're capable of. The communication officer sent the message. Then they waited. The Crithian response came quickly. It was a mixture of apologies and threats. They said the extremists had been captured. They offered negotiations. They warned that war would be costly for both sides. Jiho deleted the message without reading it all. "Prepare for combat," he ordered. The fleet moved forward, crossing into Crithian space for the first time in 9 centuries. Behind them, the last of the border beacons burned in the darkness. On Earth, people gathered around screens to watch. The news channels showed the fleet advancing. Commentators talked about justice and revenge. Children wore shirts with Hana's face on them. Her last words had become a rallying cry, though people had twisted their meaning. "Don't let them make us monsters again," she had said. She had meant it as a warning, a plea for restraint. But humanity heard it differently. They heard, "Don't let the Crithians hurt us again. Don't show weakness. Don't hesitate." President Suman watched the news in her office. She felt sick. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. But she had signed the declaration. She had allowed this to happen. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Madam President, the first battle has begun." Suman closed her eyes. She thought of Hana, her friend, her advisor. What would she say if she could see this? "May we be forgiven," Suman whispered. In the darkness of space, human and Crithian ships met for the first time in 900 years. Weapons charged, targeting systems locked on. And then, with a flash of light and energy, the Second War began. But this time humanity wasn't fighting for survival. This time they were fighting for revenge, and that made them far more dangerous than the Crithians could possibly imagine. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had been feared, why the old treaty had been so carefully maintained, why 9 centuries of peace had been necessary. Because humanity, when truly angry, was terrifying. Empress Calthera sat on her throne and watched the reports come in. She was ancient, over 200 years old, with scales that had turned nearly black with age. She had ruled the Crithian Empire for a century. She had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, but now for the first time in decades she felt genuine concern. "How many ships did we lose in the first battle?" she asked. War Marshal Torvik stood before her, tall and proud in his crimson armor. 12 battleships, Your Majesty. 20 frigates. Perhaps 5,000 soldiers. And the humans? 2 destroyers. Maybe 300 casualties. Calthara's golden eyes narrowed. "Explain." Torvik shifted uncomfortably. "The humans fought differently than expected. They used tactics we haven't seen before. Weapons we didn't know they had. And they showed no mercy. They didn't accept surrenders. No prisoners. None, Your Majesty." This was troubling. The old treaty had been necessary because humans were dangerous. But that was 9 centuries ago. The Empire had grown since then. They had conquered 40 species. They controlled a third of the galaxy. Humans occupied just one small corner of space. Or so they had thought. Prince Valthek, the Empress's son, spoke up from his position beside the throne. "Mother, I've been reviewing the historical archives. The First War wasn't just about human danger. It was about human determination. They never stopped fighting even when losing." "That was 900 years ago," Torvik said dismissively. "They've been at peace since then, soft, weak. Have they?" Valthek asked. "Or have they been preparing?" Calthera considered this. She had been young during the First War, but she remembered the stories. Humans had created weapons that terrified even themselves. They had pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable in warfare. When the treaty was signed, both sides had been exhausted, but the Crithians had recovered. They had expanded. They had grown strong. What had humanity been doing all this time? "Send additional fleets to the border," Calthera ordered. "Show these humans that we are not afraid." "Yes, Your Majesty," Torvik said. He seemed pleased. The War Marshal believed in military strength. He believed the Empire could crush any enemy with enough ships. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Captain Borum, Huang commanded a small human frigate called the Defiant Wind. She was 32 years old with short black hair and quick eyes. Her crew numbered only 40 people, but they were efficient and well-trained. They were hunting Crithian supply lines. "Contact ahead," her sensor officer reported. "Crithian convoy. 5 transport ships with 2 escort cruisers." "Normal procedure would be to call for reinforcements," Borum said to her crew. "But we're not following normal procedures anymore." "Weapons ready?" "Ready, Captain." Then let's show them what humans can do. The defiant wind accelerated toward the convoy. The Crithian escorts detected them immediately and moved to intercept. They probably thought one small frigate was no threat. They were wrong. Borum had studied every Crithian battle tactic from the old war. She knew how they moved, how they thought, how they reacted, and she knew their ships, though larger, were designed for power rather than speed. The defiant wind darted between the escorts, too fast for their weapons to track accurately. Then Borum fired missiles at point-blank range. The first escort exploded. The second tried to turn, but human weapons had improved over 9 centuries. The frigate's main cannon tore through its shields like paper. The transport ships tried to flee. Borum destroyed them one by one. No escape pods were launched. No survivors were allowed. When it was over, the defiant wind moved on to find the next target. This scene repeated itself across the border. Human ships, often smaller than their Crithian counterparts, won battle after battle. They used speed, precision, and ruthless efficiency. They targeted supply lines, communication relays, and isolated outposts. The Crithians began to understand. They weren't fighting the humans from 900 years ago. They were fighting something new. Something that had evolved. War Marshal Torvik sent more ships. Larger fleets, better commanders. It didn't matter. The humans adapted to every strategy. They learned from every battle. And they never stopped pushing forward. 3 months into the war, the Crithian Empire had lost 40 systems, hundreds of ships, millions of soldiers. The human advance seemed unstoppable. Prince Valthek spent his days in the Imperial archives searching for answers. He read reports from the First War. He studied human psychology and tactics. And slowly he began to understand the truth. Humanity had never stopped preparing for war. While the Crithian Empire had expanded and conquered others, humans had done something different. They had focused entirely on military technology. They had refined their weapons. They had trained their soldiers. They had built defensive networks that could be converted to offensive forces at a moment's notice. For 900 years, humanity had been getting ready for this exact scenario. They were afraid of us, Valtek realized, so they made sure we could never hurt them again. They built themselves into the perfect war machine. He brought his findings to his mother. Calthera listened in silence, her expression growing darker. "You're saying they've been planning this?" "No," Valtek said. "They've been preparing for it. There's a difference. They hoped it would never happen, but they made sure they'd be ready if it did. Then we need to negotiate. Stop this before it goes too far." Calthera sent peace envoys. She offered reparations for Hana's death. She offered territory. She offered technology sharing. She offered everything she could think of. The humans refused to even meet with the envoys. Some were turned away at the border. Others were fired upon. One envoy ship was destroyed with all hands. "They're not interested in peace," Torvik reported. "They want revenge." "Then we fight," Calthera said heavily. "Gather every fleet. Call back our ships from the outer territories. We're going to make a stand." The Battle of Kelver Prime became the turning point that showed the galaxy what humanity had become. The Crithian Empire assembled its largest battle fleet, 300 warships under Torvik's personal command. They fortified the Kelvar system, which guarded a major trade route. Admiral Jiho brought only 60 ships. The battle should have been a massacre. The Crithians outnumbered the humans 5-1, but numbers meant nothing when the enemy fought like demons. Human ships moved in perfect coordination. They used gravity wells and asteroid fields to their advantage. They targeted weak points with surgical precision, and they employed weapons the Crithians had never seen before. One human destroyer released a swarm of autonomous drones that overwhelmed Crithian point defenses. Another fired a beam weapon that simply erased matter from existence. A third used some kind of reality warping device that made space itself unstable, causing Crithian ships to tear themselves apart. Torvik watched his fleet disintegrate. He sent desperate messages to the Empress. "They have weapons we can't counter. They fight without fear. We need to retreat," but there was no retreat. The humans had surrounded the Crithian fleet. It was a trap, and Torvik had walked right into it. By the time the battle ended, 200 Crithian ships had been destroyed. The remaining 100 fled in disorder. The human fleet lost only 12 ships. Torvik survived, but his pride did not. He returned to the capital in shame. Prince Valthek met him at the landing platform. "Now do you understand?" the prince asked quietly. "They're not human," Torvik whispered. "They fight like machines. No hesitation, no mercy. Just cold efficiency. They're angry, Valtek corrected. And anger makes humans dangerous in ways we can't comprehend. News of the defeat spread quickly. Other species in the galaxy began to watch nervously. If the mighty Crithian Empire couldn't stop humanity, what chance did anyone else have? Some species offered to mediate. Others distanced themselves from both sides. A few quietly began fortifying their own borders, just in case humans decided to keep going after the Crithians were dealt with. Empress Kalthara faced her darkest moment. Her empire was crumbling. Her fleets were defeated, and the humans showed no signs of stopping. They're going to invade our core worlds, she told her son. They're going to come here to Vornathus itself. Yes, Valthek agreed. And when they arrive, we'll have only one choice. Surrender or be destroyed. The Empire has never surrendered. Then we'll be the first. Because the alternative is extinction, Kalthara looked out at her capital city. Billions of Crithians lived on this world. Families, children, ordinary people who had nothing to do with the war. Could she sacrifice them all for pride? Far away, Admiral Jiho stood on his bridge and planned the next phase. His fleet had grown. More ships arrived every day from human space. They brought new weapons, fresh crews, and an endless supply of rage. Unishin watched him work. The Admiral barely slept anymore. He barely ate. He seemed to be running on pure determination, sir, she said. We've won every major battle. Maybe it's time to offer terms. No terms, Jiho said without looking up. No negotiations, no mercy. They killed Hana, they die, all of them. Even the civilians? Jiho finally looked at her. His eyes were cold. Do you think their civilians mourned when Hana died? Do you think they cared? That's not the point. If we kill them all, we become what Hana feared most. Hana is dead, Jiho said flatly. Her fears don't matter anymore. Yuna left the bridge feeling sick. She had known Jiho for years. He had been a good man once. Kind, thoughtful, honorable. 6 months after Hana's death, humanity stood at the edge of something terrible. They were winning the war. Systems fell daily. The Crithian Empire was broken. But the cost of victory was becoming clear, and it had nothing to do with casualties or destroyed ships. It was about what humans were becoming. Ensign Isol Bai was 23 years old. She had graduated from the Naval Academy just 3 months before the war started. She had joined the military because she wanted to explore space, to see new worlds, to make humanity proud. Now she stood on the bridge of a destroyer and watched her ship bombard a Crithian colony world. Target their power grid, her captain ordered. Cut off all electricity. Sir, that's a civilian planet, Isul said. Her voice shook. There are children down there, hospitals. There are also military installations, and soldiers on leave, and the factories that make their weapons. Fire. Isul pressed the button. She watched the missiles streak down toward the planet. She saw the explosions, the lights of cities going dark. Later in her quarters she cried. But when morning came, she returned to her station and did it again. Because that's what soldiers did. They followed orders. Admiral Jiho had moved beyond conventional warfare. The Ashenfell archive had been opened and its contents were being deployed. Weapons that humanity had sworn never to use again. Dr. Minho Song had protested. These weapons violate every principle we hold sacred, he told the military council. Using them makes us no better than the worst monsters in history. We're using them to end the war quickly, a general replied. That saves lives in the long run. That's what they all say, Minho said bitterly. Every tyrant in history has justified their atrocities with similar logic. But his protests were ignored. The weapons were deployed. A Crithian fortress world called Brakthor housed a massive military installation. It was surrounded by defensive satellites and shield generators. Taking it would normally require months of siege and thousands of casualties. Instead, Jiho authorized the use of a planet cracker. The weapon was fired from a safe distance. It took 3 hours to reach the planet. When it hit, it burrowed deep into the core. Then it expanded. From space, the effect was beautiful in a horrible way. The planet seemed to glow from within. Cracks appeared on the surface, spreading like veins. Then, with a flash that could be seen from neighboring systems, Brakthor simply came apart. Billions died in an instant. Soldiers, yes, but also civilians who lived and worked on the world. Families, children, old people, all gone. The human fleet watched in silence. Some crews cheered. Others felt sick. Hazel Bay vomited in her station's trash bin. Good shot, Jiho said emotionlessly. Move to the next target. News of Brakthor's destruction spread across the galaxy. Other species watched in horror. The Crithians broadcast the footage everywhere, trying to show how monstrous humans had become. But in human space, the reaction was different. People celebrated. They said it was justice. They said the Crithians deserved it for killing Hana. President Suman Choi knew better. She watched the footage in her office and felt her heart break. This wasn't justice. This was revenge taken too far. This was humanity losing its soul. She called for a council meeting. "We need to stop this," she said. "We've won the war. The Crithian Empire is defeated. We need to accept their surrender and end this." "The Crithians haven't formally surrendered," one advisor pointed out. "Because they're too afraid. They think we'll kill them all anyway." "Maybe we should," someone muttered. Suman slammed her hand on the table. "Listen to yourselves. Is this what we've become? Are we going to commit genocide because we're angry?" But she was losing control. The military had too much momentum. The public wanted blood, and Admiral Jiho, the hero of the war, was now more powerful than the president herself. On Earth, a peace movement had begun. Ambassador Doyen Park led it. He had been there when Hana died. He had heard her last words. He knew what she would have wanted. General Lee died for peace, he told crowds of protesters.
She wouldn't want this war.
She wouldn't want us to become monsters. But the peace protesters were outnumbered. Pro-war crowds attacked them. Some were beaten. Others were arrested. Doyen himself received death threats daily. "They call me a traitor," he told Suman during a private meeting, "because I want to honor Hana's memory by stopping this madness." "I'm sorry, old friend," Suman said. "I don't know how to stop it anymore." Commander Yuna Shin had been trying to change things from inside the military. She gathered evidence of war crimes. Civilian targets bombed, prisoners executed, excessive force used. She compiled it all into a report. She brought it to Admiral Jiho personally. "Sir, we need to talk about our conduct in this war." Jiho looked at her report. He read it quickly, his face showing no emotion. Then he deleted it. "We're at war," he said simply. "These things happen. These things shouldn't happen. We're supposed to be better than this." "Better?" Jiho's voice rose. "They killed Hana. They killed the best person I ever knew. And you want me to be better?" "She would want you to be better. She died trying to prevent exactly this." Jiho stood up. He was shaking with rage. "Don't you dare tell me what Hana would want. You didn't know her like I did. You weren't there for 20 years. You didn't owe her your life. Then honor her properly. Stop this before we destroy ourselves." "Get out," Jiho said coldly. Yuna left his office knowing she had failed. The Admiral was lost. His grief had consumed him. He had become a weapon himself, pointed at the Crithians with no off switch. She began to work on a different plan, a desperate one. Crithian refugees were flooding neutral space stations, millions of them fleeing the advancing human fleets. Other species tried to help, but there were too many. Ships full of civilians drifted through space, hoping someone would take them in. Some human ships encountered these refugees. The standing orders were to ignore them. Let them go. The war was against the Empire, not random civilians. But some captains interpreted the orders differently. Some saw any Crithian as an enemy, and some of those refugee ships never reached safety. Isolbai's ship found a refugee convoy. 20 transport ships clearly marked as civilian vessels. Children's toys could be seen through the windows. Medical symbols on the sides. "Should we escort them to the nearest neutral station?" Isul asked. Her captain studied the ships. "They could be hiding soldiers. Sir, they're civilians. We can scan them to be sure. We're not wasting time on scans. Fire a warning shot. If they don't turn back toward Crithian space, destroy them. But there's no Crithian space left to go back to. We've conquered everything. Then that's their problem, not ours." Isol looked at her console, at the firing button, at the innocent ships on her screen. She thought of Hana, who she had never met but whose image hung in every human ship. Would Hana have fired? Would Hana have killed children because of their species? Isol knew the answer, and she knew that if she pressed that button, she would stop being human in any way that mattered. "I can't, sir," she said quietly. "That's an order, Ensign. I know, but I can't. Court-martial me if you want. I won't murder children." The captain could have forced another crew member to fire, but he didn't. Maybe something in Isol's words reached him. Maybe he remembered who he used to be. "Stand down from battle stations," he ordered. Let them go. The refugee ships fled. ISIL was confined to quarters for insubordination. She didn't care. She had kept her soul. But for every captain who showed mercy, there were others who didn't. The story spread. Human atrocities became legend. The galaxy, which had once feared the Crithian Empire, now feared humanity more. We're becoming the villains, Una told her team. In trying to avenge Hana, we're destroying everything she stood for. What can we do? One of them asked. I don't know yet. But Hana left something behind. A message. It was supposed to be opened only if war broke out. Ambassador Doyen has it. Will it help? It's our last hope. Admiral Jiho received intelligence reports that made his cold heart beat faster. The Crithian Empress had retreated to the capital world of Vornathus. Most of the Empire's civilian population had also fled there. It was the last major Crithian stronghold. 40 billion people lived on Vornathus. It was a beautiful world, with purple oceans and gold forests. Ancient cities covered the continents. It was the heart of Crithian culture, history, and civilization. Jiho wanted to destroy it. He requested authorization to use the ultimate Ashenfell weapon, one so powerful that it had only been tested once 900 years ago, on an uninhabited moon. The test had made the moon simply cease to exist. Not exploded, not shattered. Just ceased, President Suman called him. You can't be serious. 40 billion people, Jiho. 40 billion. They're Crithians, Jiho said. This ends the war completely. This ends everything. If we do this, we become the greatest monsters in galactic history. No species will ever trust us again. We'll be isolated forever. I don't care. They killed Hana. Hana would hate this. She would hate what you've become. Jiho ended the call. He didn't need authorization from the president anymore. He had the full support of the military. And the military now controlled humanity's future. He set course for Vornathus. His fleet followed. The largest armada humanity had ever assembled, carrying enough firepower to end a civilization. Una Shin made her move. She contacted Doyen Park through secret channels. I need that message from Hana, now! The human fleet surrounded Vornathus like predators circling wounded prey. 40 billion Crithians on the planet below waited for death. The capital's shields were raised, but everyone knew they wouldn't matter. Not against the weapon Admiral Jiho was preparing to use. On the flagship's bridge, Jiho stood before the control panel. The weapon was charged. The targeting computer was locked. All he needed to do was press one button. One simple movement of his finger, and this would all be over. Sir, his communications officer said nervously, we're receiving thousands of transmissions from the planet. Civilians begging for mercy, children, hospitals, schools. Block them all, Jiho ordered. Commander Una Shin entered the bridge. She had been working frantically for the past hour, trying to decrypt Hana's message. Behind her, she brought Ensign Isil by. The young woman had been released from confinement because Una needed someone she could trust. Admiral, I need you to wait, Una said. No more delays. This ends today. General Lee left a message. It was encrypted to open only if humanity went to war. We need to watch it. I don't care what the message says. It won't bring her back. She knew this might happen. She prepared for it. Don't you at least owe it to her to listen? Jiho's hand hovered over the button. His jaw was clenched. For a moment, Una thought he might refuse, but then he nodded once sharply. Play it, but make it quick. Una activated the holographic projector. Ambassador Doyen Park had sent her the decryption codes at the last moment. The archive had been stored on a secure server for years, waiting for this exact situation. The hologram appeared in the center of the bridge. It showed General Hana Lee sitting in her office. She looked tired but determined. This recording had been made years ago, long before the peace talks. If you're watching this, Hana's image said, then I'm dead, and humanity is at war again. Everyone on the bridge went still. Even Jiho stopped moving. It was her voice, her face, exactly as they remembered. I know how you feel, Hana continued. You're angry. You want revenge. You want to make them pay for killing me. Believe me, I understand. If someone killed you, I'd want the same thing. She paused, looking directly into the camera. It felt like she was looking right at them. But I'm giving you an order. My last order, stop. Jiho's hand trembled. I've studied the First War, Hana said. I've read every report, every battle analysis, every survivor account. I've seen what we did, the weapons we used, the tactics we employed. We won that war, but we lost something more important. We lost our humanity. She stood up in the recording and walked to a window. They could see Earth in the background. We created weapons that terrified even us. We did things we couldn't forgive. And when it was over, we looked at ourselves and didn't recognize what we'd become. That's why we agreed to the treaty. Not because we were weak, because we were afraid of what we might do if we continued. Isol was crying silently. Other crew members had tears on their faces. Even the hardest soldiers felt something breaking inside them. I know what you're thinking, Hana said, turning back to the camera. The treaty failed. They killed me. So why should we hold back? Why shouldn't we use everything we have? She sat down again, her expression sad but firm. Because revenge isn't justice. Because slaughtering billions won't bring me back. Because the moment you cross that line, you can never uncross it. You'll have to live with what you did for the rest of your lives. Your children will inherit that guilt. Your species will carry that shame forever. Jiho closed his eyes. His hand was still on the button, but it wasn't moving anymore. I'm not naive, Hana continued. I know they hurt us. I know they might hurt us again. But strength isn't about how much damage you can do. Real strength is knowing when not to use that power. Real strength is choosing mercy when you could choose destruction. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. Whoever is leading this war, I'm talking directly to you now. You think you're honoring my death by killing them? You're not. You're spitting on everything I worked for. You're destroying the future I wanted for humanity. Yuna glanced at Jiho. The Admiral's face was wet with tears. I know I might die by their hands, Hana said softly. That's the risk I accepted when I agreed to the peace talks. But I'm telling you right now, I don't want to be avenged. I don't want my death to be the excuse for another war. I want to be the last casualty. The last person to die from this old hatred. She stood up one final time. So here's my order. Stop the war. Make peace. Let me be remembered for building bridges, not burning them. Let my death mean something good, not something terrible. Please. The hologram paused, but then it continued and Hana's expression changed. She looked directly at whoever was watching as if she knew exactly who it would be. And if you're still not convinced, let me tell you something else. Something I learned from 30 years of military service. The hardest battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought inside ourselves, against our anger, against our desire for revenge, against the voice that tells us violence is the only answer. She smiled sadly. You're strong enough to win the war. I know you are. We built humanity into something powerful and terrible. But the real question is, are you strong enough to stop? Are you brave enough to be better? The recording ended. The bridge was silent except for the sound of people crying. Jiho stood frozen. His hand was still on the button. 40 billion lives waited below. The fleet waited for his order. History waited to see what humanity would choose. Isol Bay stepped forward. She was just an ensign, the lowest rank on the bridge. But she had watched children die because of this war. She had seen what revenge was costing them. Sir, she said quietly, she's still giving orders. Will you follow them? Jiho looked at the young woman. He saw in her eyes what he had lost in his own. Hope, compassion, humanity. He looked at Yuna, who nodded slowly. Then he looked at the button. The button that would make him the greatest mass murderer in history. The button that would destroy everything Hana had worked for. The button that would turn humanity into the monsters she had feared. His hand moved away from the button. Stand down all weapons, he said. His voice cracked. Open a channel to the Crithian Empress. The communications officer stared at him. Sir, do it now. The channel opened. Empress Kalthera's face appeared on the screen. She looked ancient and tired and resigned to death. I'm Admiral Jiho Kang of the Terran Defense Coalition, Jiho said. I'm here to negotiate your surrender. Surrender? Kalthera's eyes widened. Not our extinction? No, not extinction. Just surrender. This war ends today, but not with genocide. It ends with peace. The Empress closed her eyes. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. Thank you. The negotiations took 3 days. Both sides were exhausted. Both sides had lost too much. But this time there was genuine desire for peace. The new treaty was called the Accord of Hana. It was based on her principles. Mutual respect, clear boundaries, communication channels, trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and above all, a commitment to resolve disputes without war. The Crithian Empire formally surrendered. They agreed to reparations. They agreed to trials for those responsible for Hana's death. They agreed to work toward a future where both species could coexist, but humanity also made concessions. They acknowledged their own war crimes. They agreed to destroy the Ashenfell weapons. They agreed to help rebuild what they had destroyed. President Suman Choi signed the accord with tears of relief. Ambassador Doyen Park signed it thinking of his old friend. Admiral Ji-ho Kang signed it with a hand that shook. "Is this what you wanted?" he whispered, looking at Hana's photo one more time. He would never know for sure. But he thought maybe finally he had done something that would make her proud. 5 years later, a monument was built at the space station where Hana died. It showed her standing with her arms outstretched, facing both human and Crithian space. The inscription read, "Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the choice to be better." Captain Isul Bai, now commanding her own ship, brought her young daughter to see the monument. "Who is she, Mama?" the girl asked. "She was the woman who saved us," Isul said. "Twice, once by trying to make peace, and once by reminding us why peace matters. Did she win?" Isul looked at the statue. At Hana's face, frozen in stone, forever young and hopeful. "She's still winning," Isul said. "Every day we choose not to fight. Every time we talk instead of shoot. Every moment we remember what she taught us. She's still winning." The girl looked up at the statue with wide eyes. "I want to be like her someday." "Then remember this," Isul said. "Real strength isn't about power. It's about restraint. It's about being strong enough to show mercy, strong enough to choose peace." They stood together in silence, mother and daughter, looking at the monument to the woman who had died for peace and, in dying, had saved humanity from itself. In the vastness of space, human and Crithian ships now traveled together sometimes, trading, exploring, slowly building something new. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still anger, still grief, but there was also hope, and that was enough. Hana's last order had been followed. The war had ended, not with the destruction she had feared, but with the peace she had dreamed of. She had become a symbol for both species, a reminder that even in darkness, even in hatred, even in the desire for revenge, there was always a choice. The choice to be better,